For purposes of this discussion, I take native Caribbean social science to be the pursuit of research on Caribbean societies in a variety of scholarly disciplines by people born and residing in the Caribbean and working largely through the University of the West Indies. And the university's Faculty of Social Sciences and its journal, the Institute of Social and Economic Research and its journal Social and Economic Studies are the kind of point of takeoff for the argument I'm developing. A little bit now about the evolution or the development of that institute. The Institute of Social and Economic Research and the University of the West Indies itself, like so many others of the region's public institutions, was formed and nurtured in a colonial matrix. This mutual interdependence of scholarship on the one hand and colonial policy and administration on the other grows out of a robust tradition, one that paradoxically became more firmly rooted in those more recently settled colonies of India and Africa, for instance, than in older ones. Yet, nevertheless, in the older colonies as well of the Caribbean, the movement of sort of indirect rule led to, sort of using the social sciences to buttress colonial administration, and the increasing move towards social research was also employed in the Caribbean. Research on native social life, now that word in its other guise, took on greater interest insofar as it might assist in the Development and Welfare Act that funded the Colonial Social Science Research Council, CSSRC, formalized government support for social science research in the colonies. These were the immediate precursors of the UWI's ISER, set up in 1948 at the same time that the University College itself was established. Indeed, the Rhodes Livingston Institute became a model in some sense for several social science research institutes in different parts of the empire, while funding from the CSSRC provided budgetary support for these satellite institutions. At the Rhodes Livingston Institute, the research staff was largely comprised of social anthropologists, part of a tight network that was closely tied in with teaching and research programs in anthropology at leading English universities. And so I'm arguing in part that the discipline of anthropology, but more importantly, ethnographic methodologies, were central to the development of institutional social sciences throughout the former empire, and no less so at the UWI. So that training of Caribbean social scientists and publication by Caribbean social scientists was much more prolific in the field of anthropology and employing ethnography in the 40s and 50s than in other branches of social science scholarship and employing other methodologies. Aspiring native-born West Indian anthropologists, unlike their colleagues, say in India and the Sudan, for example, who had university programs in anthropology quite early on, from the 1920s onwards, in their own countries, aspiring native-born anthropologists in the Caribbean, like M.G. Smith and Edith Clark and so on, went to Britain for their own training. I'm told I have 5 minutes, and it's quite impossible. So I refer you now to the tables, which summarize the rather boring publication record of the journal Social and Economic Studies over 4 decades, to point out the way in which anthropology and ethnography were fairly important contributors to discourse in the 1950s, but have been marginalized in the 60s and 70s in the offerings of that journal. But I do want to share a little bit of the flavor of the place, that the ISER had a number of anthropologists associated with it, that there was a healthy complement of people both in economics and in anthropology, and that dialogue between these sort of two disciplines was a part of the enterprise from the very outset. From all accounts, discussion at the ISER was lively, collegial, and constant. And folks talk about the stimulus of having that dialogue across the disciplines in those early years. Now, I'm trying to decide where to lead you in the paper. This was not only an institutional kind of development, but I think that as exemplified in the organization Jamaica Welfare, which was set up by Norman Manley and a number of other members of the Jamaican intelligentsia in the late 1930s. The notions of development central to Jamaica Welfare were based on very much on a bottom-up conception of what was entailed by development, and saw the need for ethnographic methodologies to help illuminate that stage, so that the training and the publication done by people like Edith Clarke and Fernando Henriquez and so on were seen as being very central to sort of deciding what development was all about and what its purpose was. These twin processes of study and administrative response that were taking place in Jamaica Welfare and in government, because the colonial state too was seeing the need for all of this, provided a few salaried positions from which some members of the local intelligentsia could indulge their concerns with the poor and with issues of development. Edith Clarke, for example, was administrative secretary of the Board of Supervision, the department responsible for dispensing poor relief benefits in the colony, before she went on to study for the diploma in anthropology at the London School of Economics. And she returned to her administrative post thereafter, writing up her influential My Mother Who Fathered Me from this less than dazzling academic base. So that while the ISER provided a center for discussion in the social sciences and drew for its seminars from time to time on people thinking about the same issues but operating from elsewhere, they didn't by any means control the way in which or monopolize the way in which that thought took place. Interviews with ISER research staff of the period indicate that Clarke seldom visited or formed part of the ISER circle, and that her seminal work was not taken seriously in that inner circle until after her book was published in 1957. So that from this situation of anthropology being fairly central to the enterprise, we get to a situation of it being marginalized. And not anthropology, again, ethnography is the greater concern. Now, what happens, as you'll see from your table 2, is that we don't, as if one were to look at SES, we don't get articles on Maroons, we don't get articles on the remaining indigenous peoples of the Caribbean, nor do we get very many articles on a place like Grenada, much less a place like Union Island or Bequia or Carriacou. Where the journal publishes about is Jamaica and to a lesser extent Trinidad, Barbados, and Guyana. In other words, the whole process of center-periphery we replicate in the Caribbean, and Kingston becomes the center of our world, just like London or New York or Washington are the center of an international world. Our own practice of the social sciences marginalizes our own people. And this in a region where diversity is one of its hallmarks, where the different kinds of systems of adaptation that are developed in small places are of greatest interest and should be one of the things that should be of greatest concern to the social science community. I'm told that I'm out of time, and so rather than try to summarize what is, I hope, a very subtle argument, I'll stop there and say that a few copies of the paper are available here, and I can make others available to people if I run out and you want a copy sent to you.